there is a question that's been tugging on my mind ever since I made those major videos talking about Superman and whether or not the James Gunn version of him was truly correct, comparing him to the Zack Snyder version with Man of Steel, all that type of thing. There's been a question that's been tugging at my mind, and the question that I realized is core to every single debate about superheroes. Everyone who engages in superhero media eventually asks themselves the exact same question, either consciously or subconsciously. And every single studio that goes into superheroes, whether it be Invincible, The Boys, Marvel, DC, even My Hero Academia, has an answer to that question. And depending on that answer is really what creates the universe in of itself. Is again a question core to the entirety of superheroes as a whole. And that question is, what is a superhero? And initially you would think that this question is kind of easily answered. After all, a superhero, most people would say, is a character with, superpowers who dresses up in a super suit and goes out there saving the world. But that's not really what a superhero is. That's just the outer shell, the outer casing, if you will, of what a superhero is, the trappings, if you will, around a cardboard cutout, which again is what mostly Marvel, the MCU, has been doing. They've been having these trappings of being a superhero, that the actual core of what a superhero is. When you have a core right and correct, a lot of the other pieces aren't necessarily needed. If you think about someone like the Punisher, for example, his super suit is not a big deal. Yes, he has the skull symbol, but it's not a big deal. He doesn't even have superpowers necessarily. And he doesn't necessarily always save people. His idea is more about revenge than just saving people per se. But the basic idea is that if you have the core of a superhero down, you have everything else. Becomes not optional, but it becomes just the dressing on top, the icing on the cake, so to speak. Without the cake, you had nothing. And that's what basically Marvel has had for many years. They've had this cardboard cutout of a cake with icing on top. And of course, it looks good, but as soon as you bite in, you realize this is cardboard, it's just terrible. And the reason why that you have this, hollow middle is because that the core of what a superhero is has been hollowed out by many different deconstructions. And instead of simply understanding these deconstructions are, attacking the superhero idea and understanding what they're doing and just moving on and still making your superhero stuff, they've been started to adopt the deconstructive ideas within their actual storytelling. You see this with Marvel and you see this with DC. And of course, the deconstructions we're talking about are some of the most famous ones, the biggest ones, which are, of course, Watchmen, Invincible, The Boys. These all are major deconstructions of what superheroes really are. And they answer the question of what is a superhero differently, of course. Within the Watchmen universe, superheroes are the most close to the ideas of superheroes within Marvel and DC. They are people who go out and, have these super suits and they have all the trappings of being a superhero, but they change up the core a little bit. The core of what these characters are fundamentally very flawed human beings within different structures and systems that make them worse as human beings. They're not the flawless paragons of virtue like I always talk about. They're not anything like that. They're not even really necessarily good people. There's a whole type of dark and nasty underbelly to everything they do. Everything is idealized. Everything is brought down to the darkest and dirtiest parts. They still have this idea of them being solid human beings for the most part, at least trying to be solid human beings, but it's definitely a deconstruction, definitely a pulling down of these characters from the idea of being idealized people to being, again, not the worst of the worst, but certainly people that you wouldn't necessarily want to take advice from. And the same thing goes from Invincible. Invincible does the same thing, and it goes a little bit both deeper and not deep at the same time. It kind of has this light version of the deconstruction of superheroes, because they still have characters that want to do the right thing for the most part. But again, like I said before, what you see is that there's a peeling back of the curtain. There's this idea that their personal lives are incredibly messy. That's the main idea. If you look at these characters, their personal lives are always full of these major problems. They've always had these major and massive character flaws that really make sure they can't be idealistic characters. You wouldn't want to be a superhero within the Invincible universe. That's basically the idea. They make them very similar to, I think the idea that you can really say is cops, right? American cops. That's what the basic idea is. They work for the government. There's a system that they have, so to speak. They do want to go out there and help at first. A lot of them are sort of seemingly kind of, optimistic about their role before eventually being met with the harshness of the world. The classic idea of a, rookie cop really believing in the force and then running into the world and seeing all the corruption, the darkness that goes in there. That's basically the idea, the American idea of a cop, basically now just given superpowers and super suit becomes a uniform, so on and so forth. That's basically the idea that Invincible does within its superhero universe. This idea that basically Watchmen puts out there is that superheroes are very flawed human beings. The idea that Invincible comes up with is that superheroes are flawed human beings, or rather super cops, basically. Flawed American version of super cops. And then finally, what The Boys does is it takes all that and just takes it all to 11. It takes and says that all these superheroes are not super powered cops. They don't even stop crime for the most part. They're just terrible celebrities. Everything's a show. Everything about them is fabricated and fake. They are in of themselves just terrible human beings and terrible figures to look at in the first place. They're the worst of the worst, actually. They're no better than the villains. In fact, within the Boys universe, there's barely any villains out there, to be honest with you. It's mostly just the heroes just being the villains of the story. They are just morally corrupt, protected by a false system. So what you see here is that, again, there's a hollowing out of the core of a superhero. The first one added some nuance to it with the Watchmen. Invincible added even more nuance and took away a lot of the pieces of it, idealistic pieces, of course. And then, of course, finally, The Boys just completely destroyed it. Now, instead of there being anything but, a core to the actual story, is that nothing but the shell is left. The shell of a superhero is the only thing left within the actual stories. And the thing is, what you see from Marvel specifically, especially in the MCU, is you see them doing the exact same thing. I talked about this with Ironheart. Ironheart is not a superhero by any stretch of the imagination. She doesn't try to save people. She doesn't try to do anything good at all. She is a character that want to be out of place within The Boys when you really think about it, within Invincible. You see this from basically every single one of their more recent characters, even characters that aren't so recent like Thor. He wouldn't be out of place within the Boys universe, within the universe of, the Invincible, within the universe of Watchmen. Most of these characters wouldn't be out of place within those universes because they've basically adopted those ideals. I talked about this with Superman. When James Gunn did his version of Superman, when you really look at it, Superman within James Gunn's version is very similar to Invincible when it comes down to it. He's a guy trying to do the right thing, grew up in a certain way, but ultimately speaking, he's rejecting his heritage, his Kryptonian heritage, because his Kryptonian heritage ended up being, instead of it being the superhero version, the idealistic idea of being sent from a powerful and advanced culture who made some major mistakes, and because of those major mistakes, they sent their child here in order to try to make sure humanity doesn't make the same mistakes that they made, to bring humanity into the future. It's a very aspirational idea of sending someone to help out humanity. Again, you see this idea really put in Zack Snyder's version of it, which I've talked about how bad Zack Snyder did in other categories, but he did good in certain categories. And part of it was the backstory. He gave Superman a mission. And the mission was, again, this idea of you're supposed to be the one who leads humanity into the light. You're supposed to be the beacon of not just hope necessarily, but the beacon of progress. You're the one who's going to lead them forward. I think the line was that they will stumble, they will fall, but they will join you in the sun. That is the idea that, again, Superman really was put towards. And then you see this with James Gunn. James Gunn destroys that. Instead, he turns the Kryptonians to the Viltrumites, which is the Viltrumites are a parody of the Kryptonians in the first place. So instead of being its actual own thing, it turned itself into the parody of itself. With the Kryptonians and the Viltrumites having the same weird breeding program in order to try to basically colonize Earth, essentially. Instead of trying to help out Earth, they want it for their own purposes. So ultimately speaking, you see this idea consistently get brought forward that when it comes down to it, most Marvel characters don't understand what a superhero really is. Most Marvel writers don't understand this, that most characters within it aren't actual superheroes. You see this with DC as well, but we're focused mostly on Marvel here. They just don't have that within them. And the thing is, again, while we're deconstructing, look at these deconstructions, we haven't even answered the question ourselves. What even is a superhero? What is that supposed to be? And the answer to that question is, funnily enough, within a show that's not even within a Western context. It actually is an Eastern context. That is My Hero Academia. I've talked about My Hero Academia many times talking about how well put together that show is. But one of the main questions they really ask is, what is a superhero? Within that universe, the very idea of a superhero is very similar to the idea of which you have in Invincible, but slight differences, because again, there's a cultural difference. So they do view them as superpowered cops in a way. Because of their culture being different, they view cops differently as well. And they view cops as much more aspirational, much more not as dark and dirty as the way that Americans view cops, so to speak. So they view them as much more aspirational. So most of the superheroes that come into that universe, while they still care about fame, they still care about fortune, they still care about their career prospects, they are still mostly idealistic and solid people outside. They're not just horrible people for the most part. There's not a huge amount of corruption that really goes within the universe for the most part. It's mostly a situation and idea that most characters actually do want to help people out. Stain, of course, is a villain that pops up within I think season 2 of My Hero Academia, and his whole thing is that he believes that a lot of these superheroes are not truly superheroes. He believes All Might's the only true superhero that actually exists. That is a very good idea for a character in general, and that's basic. And he would have a field day within the within the boys, within the other universes, like the Invincible, even within the Marvel universe. He would do very well because again, they've abandoned the qualities of being a superhero. And again, what you saw there, what a real superhero is, what he believes a real superhero is, and that's very true, is All Might. And I've talked about All Might many times before, talked about him in one of my last couple of videos. When you look at All Might, he's a character that comes forward to save people for the sole sake of saving people. He's an immense drive to do so. And it's very important when it comes to a character. You need to have this intense drive and ideology that kind of forces the character to want to go out and save people, to take them away from their normal, everyday lives, to use their superhuman abilities, or even just their regular human abilities, whatever powers and abilities they have themselves, to go out and help their community, to help their people, to help the world. That is the basic idea of what a superhero truly is, the core. Now, usually they have an ideology that really makes it even better, right? Ideology that really adds the extra punch to it. And you see this really well done within The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight came around with Christopher Nolan, right? And he gave Batman an ideology on top of, just being a normal superhero. Of course, these people in the comics have done this for years as well, giving Batman an ideology, but The Dark Knight did a good job of bringing that into the wider culture, the wider consciousness. And of course, within there, he gives Batman this idea that he is going on a war against crime within Gotham. He wants to save Gotham. That becomes his main focus, a war against crime and the very idea of criminality in of itself. And, he uses the darkness to fight against the darkness. He uses the fear, theatricality and deception, powerful weapons against the uninitiated, those types of ideas in order to create this legend around this figure, the Batman, who is this, dark avenger against crime itself. And it's a very interesting idea that he brings together. But again, it's an ideology that he kind of puts in there. That's why the no killing thing becomes an idea. That's the difference between us and them. It all makes sense within that ideology. And you see this with All Might. I talked about All Might again. His ideology is the ideology of hope. He's a beacon of hope. He wants to make a world in which people can live their lives happily. And thus, he wants to do everything he can to make sure that he keeps the smiles on the faces of the people around him. He's a very self-sacrificial character in that way. His goal is the betterment of his country, the betterment of humanity, the betterment of people in general. And that's a very cool idea. He's very similar to Superman, what Superman should be. Superman, I just talked about before, should be a beacon of progress. Of course, he's the man of tomorrow, but he's also supposed to be a beacon of hope. The person who does a very similar thing. Progress only means, and within his mind, the idea of helping out humanity moving forward. Humanity should be able to smile, should not have all these fears against, things happening to them. They should be not necessarily fearless, but they shouldn't have the fear of bodily harm on a normal everyday basis. He's trying to make a more peaceful society. And you see this as a kind of a trend across all three of those characters. They all want to make society and their area that they have better. The only difference is to how much area they want to make better, right? Batman, when he's on the Justice League, wants to make the entire world safe. So all of them have that idea, right? And what you would notice is that characters who have these ideologies just do better than characters that don't. Let's be honest. Like, another character who has an ideology like that is Spider-Man. Everyone knows Spider-Man's ideology that basically boiled down to the idea of, with great power comes great responsibility, which is a little bit different from the other characters I just mentioned, because those characters, they have a more aspirational idea, while Spider-Man has a more guilt-based idea. It's more of something that pushes him forward from underneath necessarily. So with the idea of great power comes great responsibility, it becomes an actual burden on him. One of the best Spider-Man ideas is that ultimately his superpowers make his life actively worse In the opposite way, though, he still saves other people, makes other people around him, makes the city he's in, makes that whole place better, but it makes his own work life significantly worse. That's why Spider-Man usually is portrayed as a loser within his actual personal life, because it's a inverse, relationship. The city gets better, but he gets worse. That's the idea. He can't seem to have it all. So it's a more realistic, a more deconstructivist view of the superhero idea, but not too deconstructivist to the point where there's no core that's still there. And Iron Man's also similar. Iron Man has the idea of, again, since because of his sense of his past, because he sent, weapons to the wrong people, he has this idea within himself that he's responsible for a lot of the evil things in the world that have been done. So he has this idea that as a recompense, recompense is the best word. I think there's another word I'm looking for, but I can't think of it right now. For his crimes, he has to basically do everything he can to save the world, to make the world safer. As a result, to build a suit of armor around the entire world, as I said, and within the Avengers 2, Age of Ultron. And that's been the basic idea of Iron Man's character, and it really drives him forward, and everyone understands it. It's a very cool ideology to have. Of course, Captain America's ideology very similar to Superman's. He doesn't like bullies, as he said himself. I don't like bullies. So he doesn't like when someone with greater power and oppressive force basically use their power to oppress people who are weaker and smaller and not innocent, essentially, is the idea. So all these characters, if you notice, these best characters have this ideology that drives them forward. And that's basically what they've lost within the overall Marvel Universe. They don't have superheroes with an ideology that drives them forward. They don't even have the core idea of just wanting to help and save people because that's the right thing to do. They have nothing really when you really think about it. Ironheart is not a character who does things for any type of good reason. She does things for her own personal gain. And the same thing even goes to characters like Superman within the James Gunn universe. I talked about that. The reason why I talked about it is that when you look at the way that James Gunn writes not an attack on him, but just a observation of the way he writes characters. A lot of times they're doing good things because it affects them personally. A situation where the great line I always quote from Guardians of the Galaxy is this line where, Rocket says, "Why should we save the galaxy? The galaxy never did anything for us, right?" And Star-Lord replies, "I'm going to save the galaxy because I'm one of the idiots who live there." Right? It's not a selfish idea, but it is a little bit selfish. It's the idea that I'm here too, so I ought to do something about it, right? I would also suffer the consequences of the villain's actions, and that I should do something about it, rather than it being a purely self-sacrificial idea of where I could be outside of the amount of influence period, and I still would come in there and help regardless. It's a very interesting idea there. Like for Superman, again, even though we had this whole, weird refugee or whatever arc to the side that he has within that movie, it's an idea that I have to go there because they put my name out there, they believe in me, and thus I have to go out there and save those guys. When in reality, it should be, I want to save people for the sake of saving people in general. It's part of your overall ideology. But that's enough about them. Just talking about the MCU specifically, when you look at those characters, I made the video talking about it, they have no heroes in that universe. And all their most hated characters have no ideology. Captain Marvel has great power, but she has no actual ideology of why she uses her power why she does anything that she does. And that's a big problem with Captain Marvel. It's a big problem with all the characters you bring up. Any character you talk about, Sam Wilson's Captain America, talk about Thor as he's been made in the recent years, talk about all these other different characters, Hulk, Bruce Banner's Hulk, talk about, Shuri, talk about all these characters. None of them really have a core ideology that really drives them forward. They don't have a core. They're cardboard cutouts of a character. And that's the reason why they are like that, because Marvel doesn't understand what a superhero is. They haven't asked themselves that core, deep question. The question of what a superhero truly is.